Knowing how to be a leader at work and being seen as one are two different skills. Most of the advice out there focuses on the first, the how to be. Today, I want to work on the second, the being seen as, because for a lot of you, it's the second one that's costing you. Here's where you likely are. You're delivering. You're the person your team relies on, the one who steps up when things get difficult, the one who quietly fixes the problems when people walk past. Your performance reviews are consistently strong. People describe you as invaluable, dependable, a safe pair of hands. Is that sounding true? But yet, when the conversations that matter happen, the succession discussions, the stretch assignments, the room where the next senior appointment gets decided, you are not in them. Someone else, often someone less experienced and with less impact, is being talked about as a future leader while you're being talked about as a great performer. If that gap between the leadership you're delivering and the leadership you're being credited with is something you recognize, this episode is for you. I've talked before about why you're not getting promoted even when you're overperforming, and today goes underneath that to the thing really driving it, perception of you. Why the picture people hold of you doesn't match the leader you actually are. And most importantly, what can you do about it? Let's dive in. Before we get into the practical work, I need to shift how you think about this problem, because the way most of us hold this issue makes it feel unsolvable. When you're not seen as a leader you want to be, there are two stories you're probably telling yourself. The first is, I'm doing everything right and the system is broken. I hear you, I feel you, I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, I've helped so many women with that. Feeling like everything around you is against you. The second thing I see, the second story is, there must be something wrong with me. Again, been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Often we have one followed by the other. There's no particular way around, but I've seen both stories in almost every woman I coach and myself as well. I see them constantly, sometimes in the same week, occasionally on the same day. Here's the problem. Neither story gives you anything to do. One makes it entirely external. It's not your problem. It's somebody else's problem and you're angry about it. So you wait and hope. The other makes it a character flaw. So we shrink. I want to offer you a third story, one which has the advantage of being both more accurate and more useful to you, something you can really do something about. Perception is a system. It has inputs, and you control more of those inputs than you think you do. Let me tell you about a client of mine, and I'm sharing this with her details changed as always. Senior director, engineering, 12 years at the same company. Brilliant woman. The person who had been quietly kept going through two major projects that would otherwise have died, through three reorgs. When we started working together, she'd been passed over twice. And her opening line to me was something I hear far too often. They just don't see me as leadership material, and I don't know what else I can possibly do. That's what we found when we met, but here's what we found when we actually looked deeper. Her updates were written entirely in the language of delivery. Her valuable work, the rescues, the mentoring, the risks she'd headed off were invisible. By their very nature, they were invisible. She'd never once written down that valuable work to a person, the decision makers, that would actually read it and take notice of it. In meetings, she was the one taking the actions, not the one framing the problem. We talked about framing problems recently on this podcast a lot because it's really important. And when I asked her what she wanted to be in terms of how she wanted to be known as a leader, what did she want to be known as the leader of, she went quiet for what felt like a full minute, probably 30 seconds. 12 years of extraordinary work and no story attached to any of it. She did not know who she wanted to be noticed as being. You need a story. That's first lesson from today. You need a story. Nothing about this woman's capability needed to change. And within 9 months, having changed her inputs, she was leading the succession conversations instead of being left out of it. I'm not promising you 9 months. Every situation is different. I'm telling you what became possible the moment she stopped treating perception as a verdict and started treating it as a system that she could control. How people see you at work isn't a fixed judgment that got made about you at some point and filed away, never to be looked at again. It's a picture being continuously assembled from signals, the language you use, the work you're visibly attached to, the way you show up in rooms, the story that exists about you, and why it matters. Change the signals consistently and the picture will change. Not overnight, perception has inertia, but it will change, and reliably so. I've seen this dozens and dozens of times, possibly hundreds of times at this point. Now, one thing before we go any further, because I don't want to be misunderstood here. Bias is real. Let's not understate that. Bias is real, and I think it's getting worse again. The promotion gap for women in tech is real. It's well documented. We're in a growing toxic atmosphere right now in 2026 at the time of recording this. There are environments where women's signals get systematically discounted. And if you're in one of those, the answer may eventually be to take your leadership somewhere that is valued. I'm not asking you to pretend the playing field is level. It's not. But what I am saying is this: you can't fix the system today, but you can change your inputs to it today. And in my experience of coaching hundreds, actually over 1,000 women at this point, through exactly this, changing your inputs moves the needle far more often and far farther and far faster than most women expect. And a lot of the time, the toxic environment around you changes when you change your inputs. Doing that work isn't capitulating to a broken system. It's a strategy that's going to level you up. So if perception is a system, where is yours leaking? In my coaching work, I see 4 distinct gaps, which we're going to go through now, because these gaps genuinely stop capable women being seen as the leaders they are. Most of what you will hear, you will recognize yourself in at least one of them, maybe multiple ones. Some of you, and I say this with love, will recognize yourself in all 4. They're common for a reason. I see them all day, every day. Okay, gap number 1, the language gap. You talk like the doer, not like the leader. This is the most common one, and the one with the fastest payoff when you fix it. Listen to how you talk about your work. If you're describing activity, what you did, how you did it, how much of there was, you're speaking the language of execution. Leaders, and most importantly, the people who anoint leaders, speak the language of outcomes and implications. Not, we shipped the migration on time, but we've removed the biggest scaling risk ahead of next year's growth targets. Not, I ran the incident response, but here's what the incident told us about how we're exposed, and here's what I think we should do about it. The difference isn't spin, it's altitude that you are talking at. The first version tells people you do good work. Very important, probably got you all the way to where you are. The second version tells people you think about the business the way its leaders need to do. And people promote and platform the leaders who already sound like they're operating at their next level. And here's the part I really want you to hear. Nobody is going to teach you this. The organizations that promote you for sounding strategic almost never tell you that that's what they're listening for. You find out by noticing who gets platformed, and if you listen carefully to the people above you who are rising, you'll hear it. They're not describing tasks, they're describing what the tasks mean. They're not going on about how hard they worked, at least not to the bosses, they might be to you. They're talking about the outcomes they've achieved, not saying, well, I spent 60 hours on that this week. This has to be done deliberately. So take your last written update, and I mean actually go and find it after this episode, and rewrite every activity statement as an outcome statement. What did it change, protect, unlock, or reduce for the business? If you can't answer that for a piece of work, that tells you something important too. We'll come to that in the visibility gap later on. This is the same shift I talk about in moving from firefighter to strategist. And if you're someone whose ideas get lost or rephrased by others in meetings, it pairs with the work of being heard when you speak as well. So these are all relevant topics that if you go through my back catalogue are really, really useful to you. Make sure you practice this in a low stakes environment first. Your weekly update, your one-on-ones with your boss. So you learn to speak strategically, naturally, before the stakes are really high. Which brings us to gap 2, the visibility gap. Your best work has no name on it. Here's a really uncomfortable pattern I see over and over. And again, this could sound like victim blaming as the only woman in the room. The women who are most frustrated about not being seen are very often the ones doing enormous amounts of work that nobody can attribute to them. The glue work, the mentoring, the crisis you quietly averted, which by definition nobody noticed because it didn't happen. The project you rescued where the credit landed on whoever presented it. You know you did it. Your team might know. The people who decide your future have no idea though. I said it before and I'll keep saying it. If you don't openly celebrate your achievements, who will? Nobody is coming to excavate your contribution and say, look how amazing she is. Making your work visible isn't bragging, it's information the organization genuinely needs in order to make good decisions about you. One of my clients once averted what would have been a genuinely serious client-facing outage. She saw it coming 3 weeks out, rallied 2 other teams, fixed the underlying issue, and the launch went out clean. Do you know what her leadership remembered of her for that quarter? Nothing. Because from where they sat, nothing happened. Meanwhile, a peer who firefought a much smaller incident, visibly, noisily, over the dramatic weekend, got named in the all hands. That's not a fair outcome, but I need you to see the mechanics of it. Drama is visible by default. Prevention is invisible by default. If your leadership style is prevention, and for many of the women I work with who are extraordinary, the visibility will never happen by accident. If that's true, you have to build it on purpose. Now, I want to say that prevention is worth so much the business, but you need to do something to make sure people see it. There are 2 practical things I would suggest doing here. First, attach your name to outcomes in writing, in the places decision makers actually look, the update email, the retro summary, the quarterly review. Here's what my team delivered and here's the call I made to make us get there. It's a factual sentence, not a boast, and it's essential for visibility. The second is to audit what you're spending your time on, because busy is not the same as valuable. And if most of your week goes on work that's structurally invisible, no amount of communication will fix that. Some of that work needs to stay because it matters, but go in with your eyes open about the trade you're making for busy work versus high profit structural work that's strategic and makes a difference to the business. Okay, gap number 3, the signal gap. You're sending helper signals, not leadership signals. This one is subtle and it stings a little bit, so stay with me. Every behavior you repeat at work is a signal about the role you play. And a lot of the behaviors that make you indispensable are, right now, signaling support function rather than leader. Always being the one who takes the notes, organizes the offsite, smooths the conflict, picks up the drop ball, saying yes to everything, waiting to be invited rather than inviting yourself. It has probably got you to where you are today. But framing your contributions as questions, would it make sense to? When you actually have a recommendation, I think we should, makes a difference. None of these behaviors are wrong in themselves. The problem is the pattern. If the picture people are assembling of you is a picture mostly built on helper signals, you help out, you make things happen, then when they imagine a leader, they don't imagine you. It's genuinely not a malicious pattern. It's a pattern of matching you to what you are doing so far. You've been teaching them what role you play, and they've learned the lesson. I want to give you a real example of how fast this can move, because I know it feels like turning a tanker. A client of mine, a director who became her VP's unofficial chief of staff. Now, I'm a big believer in a VP having a chief of staff, and I often will tell my VP clients, you need a right-hand person, go find yourself a chief of staff, a technical program manager, somebody who can be your number 2 to lean on because you've got so much to hold. So it's a great thing that happens to some directors to be this chief of staff without the title or the pay. And this made exactly 3 changes. She stopped volunteering to capture actions in the leadership meeting. She started opening her projects updates by framing the decision the group needed to make. And when she was asked, as she always was, to organize the offsite, she said, I'll own the agenda and the strategic framing, and I'd suggest rotating the logistics. Small, almost invisible changes. Within her quarter, her VP described her in a calibration meeting, and this got back to her as the most strategic person in my team. Same person, same capability, different signals. She stopped fixing everything and delegated that instead. The key thing that she did was she made sure it still happened. She didn't just let it all fall apart, but she made sure she wasn't the one doing it. So she was freed up for the more strategic things and owning the more strategic things. So start swapping signals deliberately. Take the stance. My recommendation is X, here's Y, instead of I think we might, what do you think? Rotate the glue work rather than absorbing it. It is so hard to let go of being the glue. I know that. I do it all the time. I've given my team permission to tell me to stop doing things. It's my natural tendency, so I'm sure it is for some of you. Be the person who frames the problem or names a decision that needs making rather than being the glue that keeps the room together, that remembers for the leadership. This is the behavior layer of executive presence, and it's but one repeated signal at a time. You have to signal appropriately. Okay, gap number 4, the narrative gap. Nobody can say what you're the leader of. Here's a test. If I asked your boss's boss to finish a sentence, she's the person you go to when? Could your boss, could you tell me what you are to the business? Why people rely on you? The women who get seen as leaders have a narrative, a short, repeatable, single phrase. It's a story about what they lead, what they're building, why it matters. She's the one turning our data platforms into actual product. She's the leader who takes struggling teams and makes them hard. The story travels into rooms that you're not in and does your advocacy for you. If no such sentence exists about you, it's usually because you've never written it. You've been so busy doing everything that you've never chosen the thing. And I do mean chosen because this is the part women resist. A narrative requires you to emphasize some of your work over the rest of it. When you're brilliant at many things, picking one feels like a loss. But a story about everything is a story about nothing. And she does a great job across the board, has never once in all my years of coaching been the sentence that got someone into a succession conversation, even though breadth is important at the executive level. So take the time to write your one-liner. What are you the leader of? Not your job title, the change you drive, the problems you own. A good test is whether the sentence would still be true if you change companies, because that's what makes it about your leadership rather than the current job description. Then use it everywhere, in how you introduce yourself, in how you frame your updates, in what you tell your boss you want to be known for. Give the people who would advocate for you the words to do it with. Because right now, if they wanted to champion you in a room you're not in, what exactly would they say? Now, I can already hear some of you saying, Toni, I know all this. I've read the advice about speaking up and claiming credit. Perhaps you've listened to 100 episodes of my podcast, but I just don't do it. If that's you, the gap isn't knowledge, and we need to talk about what's actually in your way, because if your mindset is holding you back, it's a genuine question we need to answer, not a rhetorical one. For most of the women I work with, the block is one of 3 beliefs. First, good work should speak for itself, and having to point at mine feels like cheating. Have you ever told yourself that? I understand it, and it's wrong. Work does not speak. People do. The belief in a pure meritocracy is the single most expensive belief I see in high-achieving women. I did a whole episode on mastering your value and what understanding yourself costs you. If you do want to go deeper on that one, go check out the show notes for the link to that. Second, if I act like a leader before I'm given the title, I'll be seen as arrogant or as too much. Hey, maybe you've had that feedback in the past. I've been told I was acting above my competence because that wasn't my title. I wasn't allowed to make those decisions. It sucks. Now, the fear here isn't irrational. The double standards are real. The women who do get penalized behavior that gets men promoted is a thing, but the answer isn't to shrink. It's to be strategic. Outcome language, factual attribution, clear recommendations, crisp narrative. None of those trip the too much tripwire. They read instead as competence, not ego. You have more safe room to move than the fear is telling you. I want to sit with that second issue a moment longer, because the fear of double standards deserves more than a drive-by comment from me. Yes, there is a narrower band of acceptable behavior for women in tech organizations, and pretending otherwise would insult you and your intelligence. But here's what I've noticed in years of watching this closely. The behaviors that most reliably trigger the backlash are the ones that we read as women as claiming status, interrupting, self-aggrandizing, taking up space for its own sake. Right? The behaviors I want you to hear, I'm teaching you in this episode, read as adding clarity. Frame your decisions. State a recommendation with reasons, just not too verbose. Attribute outcomes factually. These are contribution signals, not dominant signals. Men do get promoted for dominant signals, and it does backfire for us, which is why I keep saying women cannot mimic men in the workplace. It doesn't work. The double standards are real. And actually, I don't think it's very healthy for anyone to have those dominant signals. It's just historically men have got away with it. I'm going to use got away with it rather than being promoted for it. I think they get promoted despite it rather than because of it. I do not think it's healthy. So as much as I hate the double standards, I think it's good that we're held to a high standard. I just wish everybody was. The room receives those contribution versus dominant signals very, very differently. And that's why this playbook works for us as women, not the generic be more confident that so often backfires, because our role models of confidence are men and they don't get held to the same standards. Okay, let me go into the third thing that I see as an issue here. If I try to be seen and it still doesn't work, that will hurt me more than never trying. This is a quiet one that often women need to feel comfortable with me. Like there's might be like 1 or 2 months coaching before they feel comfortable enough to actually admit that this is what's going through their heads. And it breaks my heart. By the way, if you ever come work with me, please, the more you can open up to me, and it's a completely safe space. I will never share anything that can be identified as you with anybody. I do give stories on this podcast, but even my clients don't always know I'm talking about them on this podcast, some details deliberately. But the more you can be honest with your coach about what is actually going through your head, it's like a therapist, it is a different job, the more we can help you. But I see this more than any of the others, but it's just quiet. It's a quiet one that means we feel invisible. We stay safe because we're preserving our story that we could have been recognized if we'd wanted to be, but we deserve not to be. We deserve better than a protection story that we tell ourselves. Here's what I've watched happen in practice over and over with women. When women do this work properly and consistently, it works far more often than the fear predicts. And in the cases where it genuinely doesn't, where the changes you signal for 6, 12 months and the organization still hasn't seen you, that's not failure, that's data about the company. It tells you the problem was never you, and it tells you where not to spend the next 5 years of your career. But if instead you listen to that fear of, well, what if it doesn't work, and you stay quiet, you don't know that company is never going to promote you. And you'll end up coming to a coach like me in years' time, burnt out because you've been overlooked for so long that you've reached breaking point. I want none of you listening to this podcast to ever reach burnout and breaking point ever again. My job as presenter of this podcast is, if you follow what I tell you week after week, that you will never end up burnt out ever again because you haven't been promoted. You will never sit in angry mode for very long. Don't get me wrong, we're all going to get angry from time to time. But you'll never need to sit there for months on end because there's been another time when you've been looked over or not heard or talked over or your ideas are being taken. And that starts with being honest with yourself and getting out of your comfort zone and showing people what you want and then getting the data. Are they going to listen, or is it time to get out? If we don't get out, we are propping up a broken system. Okay, let's talk about where to start this week. You have the map now, the 4 gaps and the mindset that you need to do underneath that. Here's how to make it real, and I want you to actually do this. Not just nodding along as you're listening to this on your commute in the car, right? First, run the diagnosis. Take 20 minutes with a notebook. Be honest with yourself. Which of the 4 gaps is costing you right now? Listen to yourself in your next few meetings. Reread your last update emails and ask, am I speaking in activity and outcomes? The language gap. Can my work be attributed to me? The visibility gap. What signals am I repeating? The signal gap. Does a one-line narrative about my leadership exist? The narrative gap. Language, visibility, signal, narrative. Pick the one gap where the honest answer made you wince. It might be all 4, but pick at least one, okay? Second, change one signal starting now. Not 4 changes, 1. Done consistently for a month. Rewrite your weekly update in an outcome language. Put your name in the thing you'd normally let slide into anonymity. Replace one, would it make sense for, with my recommendation is. Draft your one-liner and say it out loud to another human. Consistency is what changes the picture. So pick the change you can sustain. And then thirdly, tell one person what you want. Perception change accelerates enormously when at least one person with influence knows what you're building towards. That might be your boss, a sponsor, a mentor. I want to be seen as a leader who X. And I'd value your read on what's in the way. One sentence. It turns a private ambition into something other people can help with. And a word on timescales here, because I know some of you will be doing this for 2 weeks, see nothing and conclude it doesn't work. Perception has inertia. The picture people hold of you is assembled over years, and it doesn't redraw itself overnight. One of the reasons I love first 90 days coaching, and I advocate, if you are changing jobs, whether it's internal or external, new company, get first 90 days coaching, transition coaching as I call it. It is the most important time because it sets the perception of you it's not immovable, but it's fairly solid, right? What you do in those first 90 days really, really matters more than you could possibly know. It does change after that, but it takes time. So you need to wait between 2 to 6 months. You're looking for a moment, a comment in a calibration meeting, an invitation you didn't expect, your name in a conversation it's never been in before, where suddenly you realize the picture has changed. You've got to keep going through the quiet part. Make a note in your calendar when you change your behavior, because if you're anything like me, a week feels like a year. And this is when most of us stop. We stop at the wrong moment, just when people are starting to see a change in us, but they haven't articulated that yet, even possibly to themselves, definitely not to you. And you're like, why am I bothering? That is the time to double down. So put it in your calendar and put something in for 6 months' time to evaluate what's happened, right? Give yourself the time. Your career deserves that time. Give it to yourself. Don't give up after 2 weeks because you're not getting signals back. At the end of the day, leaders only get, not only, but the higher up you get in the organization, the more you need to be prepared for getting more constructive negative feedback than positive feedback. One of the reasons it can feel lonely at the top is because you tend to not get that much well done feedback. That kind of drops off a cliff once you're above director. If this episode landed with you, if you can see the gap between the leader you are and the leader you see, and you want to work on how to close it in your specific situation with your specific organization and its specific politics, let's do that together on a strategy call. Every month I offer a limited number of these complimentary calls to listeners of this show, 45 minutes, your situation, and a clear picture of your most direct path forward. Book yours at tonicollis.com/let's-chat. Thank you for listening, and remember, keep leading. Bye for now.